So yesterday evening we discussed about thinking the holy name is exaggeration, or interpreting the holy name, or giving imaginary meanings to the holy name. So related to that is another offense called equating the name with material karma, such as karma kanda. So the truth is that the name is not different from the Lord, and the Lord is superior to the material world, whereas karmas arise from the gunas, and they elevate you to higher planetary systems, or they give you material benedictions. So they're rooted in the material world. So the name is quite different from material karmas. And not only the name, but bhakti of any form is quite different from material karmas. It does not originate in the material world. As the song says, you know, the holy name comes from Goloka, and then it manifests on your tongue, dances on your tongue. So Harinama Sankirtan comes from Goloka and it manifests on your tongue. So it is something completely different from this material world. Whereas the karmas which are mentioned in the Vedas they arise from material energy. Of course, there is a whole section of the Vedas dedicated to karmas. That's the Karma Kanda section. And we have Puranas as well, and Smriti Shastras. Of course, they're all about, or most of them are about, Varnashram system. And this deals a lot with karma yoga, how to elevate yourself in the material world by doing pious activities and avoiding sin. So the name is quite different from that. Bhakti is different from that also. So, in fact, we say name is not different from Supreme Lord Himself. So, to equate the two things, material energy and Supreme Lord and His name, is offensive. So, unfortunately, people who don't have faith in the scriptures about bhakti, or the meaning of the true meaning of the Bhagavad Gita, they will imagine that the name actually is material, and it gives material results only. In one sense, maybe we can say it's a little better than people who simply reject the name, but they're attributing it, or they're limiting it to material gunas. So therefore, that's offensive. So, of course, why does the Lord even give this whole system of karma yoga? As Sanatana Goswami mentioned in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the scriptures about karma are very extensive. We'll see a large amount of things written about karma and varnashram. In fact, we have all these smritis, basically, that's varnashram system. And then we have the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas, 2 sections dealing with that. That is the Brahmanas and the Aranyakas. So it's quite prominent and the Puranas, of course, also glorify it. And we often hear about Dharma, you must do your Dharma, etc. So all this is that material Dharma. And so it is quite prominent. Why does the Lord even support this? And that is because these people, most of the people, are not qualified for bhakti, and therefore they must have some means of elevation. So the Lord has quite cleverly devised this system so that people can gradually get purified of the gunas and rise to sattva gun, which is the best of the gunas. And that's more favorable for spiritual life than the lower gunas. So, in other words, the system of karma yoga is for unqualified people to give them a higher qualification. But it's a very slow process. So generally they don't jump from one varna to another within a lifetime. That will take many, many lifetimes, very slow steps. That is also natural, because we understand that people in general cannot change immediately. It's very difficult in one life to change one habit, even for most people. They got one bad habit, They could struggle for the whole life to change it. Maybe they don't get it changed in their life, or maybe they do, but it's a big struggle just to change one habit. Let's say they're addicted to drinking. So this is one habit that's struggle all their life to gradually control that. So to rise to the guna, through the gunas is difficult, but nevertheless, that system guarantees that in a very gradual way. So if you're in the lower gunas, you're a Sudra, and you follow the rules properly, then you have to follow some sense control. You're forced to follow some rules of sense control. It is not so strict as the sense control for the Brahmanas, but there is some sense control there that they're capable of doing. And if they follow that properly, it's to their credit. They're at least avoiding some of the sinful activities. At least they get married. So they follow a little bit of, a dharma in that sense, and the rest they're permitted some things under certain circumstances. And by following that system, gradually they get purified and they rise up to Rajagun. And if they follow those rules as a Vaishya or Kshatriya, then they rise up to Sattvagun. So it's a system of gradual elevation through the gunas over many lifetimes. So to make this system workable, it needs to be preserved for long periods of time, over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Otherwise the people, they can't rise up because the system disappears at a certain time, then it's useless. And where are they going to go? So therefore the system is of karma yoga or karma kanda has been devised for the people who are not qualified for bhakti. They don't have faith. So at least let them follow some rules and regulations and control their senses to some degree. And then they control to different degrees according to their guna. So we get varnas and we get ashramas out of that. Yoga is also included, and this is the higher, when you get to jnana, then you can, and sattvagun, then you can do jnana and yoga. But anyway, the system of karma is there for people in the material world. So it has its place, but it's not ultimate. And so it may involve sacrifices and charity works, punyas, etc., worship of pitras and devatas. We see in Bhagavad Gita that worship of devatas is considered to be in sattvagun. However, people in the lower gunas are recommended also to do worship devatas. So people in tamagun worship Shiva, or people in Rajagun are supposed to worship Brahma. That was the original advice of Vedavyas. So people in the different gunas worship various devatas, and they get some material result from that. In the process of doing that worship, then they have to follow certain vratas, vows, to please that particular devata. So they have to control their senses to some degree. So we see, for instance, in India that they have worship of this one devata in South India called Ayappa. Very famous. And there's all sorts of people go and they dress up in black and whatever. But at least they do this vow for, I think, 60 days or whatever. 60 days? Or whatever. They at least have to be celibate. So they're brahmachari for 60 days a year, at least, for that period. And they trek down, walk down to this place in Kerala, and then they go see the deity, whatever. So they follow a little bit of restriction like that. So in this way we have some restrictions on people who are worshipping devatas, etc. So there's some advantage for them, even though it's this material. So, of course, it is impermanent, but it's one step towards becoming qualified for bhakti. It's not a cause of bhakti, but it's one step towards getting favorable for bhakti, because you get to control your senses. And we know that qualification for bhakti was, of course, faith and attraction to hearing the bhakti scriptures, but not too much material attachment. If you've got too much material attachment, then it's very difficult to do bhakti. So at least rising to the gunas help us become more and more detached. So it's an indirect process leading to bhakti. So therefore it gets glorified. We saw that there is what we call artavad, or exaggerated praise. So in some places the process of karma is glorified as being the highest process and an eternal process. And in fact, it is said that going to Svargaloka is the ultimate goal, because Svargaloka is Amrita. It's eternal, no death. So it makes all sorts of promises which actually are not true, because then we know you can fall from there. As Bhagavad Gita says, you'll fall from Svargaloka after your punyas are exhausted. But nevertheless, there's the scriptural verses encouraging people to do this process so they can, at least get control their senses to some degree. This is the reason why we have these other systems there. So people that get absorbed too much in this, then they think this is the final goal, and that they see everything else in terms of that goal. In other words, their eyes become colored, so they'll think of bhakti as also a process like going to Svargaloka, since that's the ultimate goal. And they'll say the name is also a material means to get to Svargaloka. Of course, the name can do that. It can elevate you to Svargaloka. It is not a problem, because we saw that the name is Chintamani. It can give you anything in the material world. Plus it can give you liberation. And it can also give prema. So it can give everything. So no problem for the name to give these things. But we should not limit the name to that. If we do, then we're actually missing out on the real value of the chanting the holy name. It's just like there's a story of the Chintamani gem, which is a material Chintamani gem, by the way, and there was a Sanatana Goswami or somebody left it in the garbage, and somebody picked it. I've got a Chintamani stone, and he asked, "Can I take it?" And Goswami said, "Yeah, take it." Yeah. And because he wanted to get all sorts of material things from it. Then he begins to wonder, why is he giving you this stone? There must be some trick. So he goes back to the Goswami. He said, well, why did you give this to me? It's so valuable. I can get anything in the material world. Goswami said, well, that's not the highest thing. If you want to get prema, then you got to chant the holy name. It's higher than that. So getting material things can be given by the name, but the highest thing actually is prema. So we shouldn't mistake and limit the holy name and think it's only a material type of process. So, and at the same time, we shouldn't think that karma yoga is the ultimate process. It's only one step towards the final process of bhakti. So, when we get to bhakti, then we can give up all the other processes. So there's many statements that say that once we take to bhakti, we're not obligated, we're not indebted to the pitras and the devatas or anybody else. Even if we give up bhakti, we don't commit sin, or we give up karmas, we don't commit sin. On the other hand, if we do all the other processes but we don't do bhakti, then we're useless. So therefore, if we attain bhakti, then we can give up those karmas. So that is because bhakti is quite different from all the other processes. Here's a diagram of the gunas on the left-hand side. So we have tamaguna at the bottom, rajaguna above that, sattvaguna above that, and that's where the material world ends. And beyond that we get the spiritual world, which is nirguna. And for people following dharma, then we have at the bottom sakama karma yoga. Do the karma yoga and get your material results. So that's for the people in tamaguna and rajaguna. They don't aspire for anything out of this world. They only want promotion in the material world. So it satisfies them, but it limits their sense activity. And as you rise through the gunas and rajaguna, then you get a little bit of sattva. You can practice nishkama karma yoga. You can do those same rituals and follow the same rules of dharma, but you give up attachment to getting the enjoyment out of them. You do it simply because the Lord tells you to do it. You should control your senses, not for any particular material enjoyment goal. So that brings you into sattva guna. And when you're fixed in sattva guna, then you can do jnana and astanga yoga. Now if you just do jnana and astanga yoga, of course you can get liberation. But if you want to get prema, then you have to get to bhakti yoga, which is beyond the gunas. So sattva guna gives rise to the jnana. Yeah, it is a product of Jnana as a product of sattva guna, actually. Bhakti is not a product of the gunas at all. Yeah, it comes from Krishna. It's nirguna. Yeah, so it is quite different. So the karma yoga is a process in the material world to gradually raise you up until you get to sattva. Then you can do jnana and astanga yoga. If you're unfortunate, then you go to liberation. If you're fortunate, then you can proceed to bhakti. So bhakti is the end, and karma is only the means to get to bhakti, which is beyond the material modes. Right? The bhakti is a means also. It's an end here because it's higher than karma yoga as a means to get to bhakti, but then bhakti in the beginning is also a means to get to prema. But prema is also bhakti. So bhakti is also it's a sadhana, a means, and it's also the end. The sadhya. It's called the sadhya. So it is the means and the end, prema. So it is, the other processes, we give them up. When you get to jnana and astanga yoga, you give up the karma yoga. And when you give liberation, you give up jnana yoga and astanga yoga. You keep giving things up. When you go to bhakti yoga, you give up the lower things. But when you get prema, you don't give up the bhakti. When you chant the holy name and get prema, you don't give up the chanting of the name. So bhakti continues eternally. It's a sadhana, and then it continues in the goal as well. The other process is once you get the goal, you give up the process. So they're not eternal. Bhakti is eternal. So when we're in the material world and we use the holy name as sadhana, it may look impure. We may be doing namabhas or whatever, or impure bhakti. So it looks as if the holy name is impure and bhakti is impure, but we gave the example of the sun. Actually, it's not. It's just that we are covered over. It's not the name is covered over, we're covered up. So the name does not manifest its full potency because of that. But if we practice properly, then it will manifest its full power. So that it starts to manifest full power in Sudanam when we come to that stage. And we continue to chant Sudanam, then we get to Prema. So we should never mistake the name for material karmas and think that it's limited to material goals. It arises from Krishna himself, beyond the gunas, and it takes us beyond the gunas up to Krishna. So it is very different from material karmas, which are limited to the material world. So if we make this offense due to ignorance or bad association, then we should desire to purify ourselves and associate with devotees, taking their foot dust, prasadam, and foot water, which are the processes of associating with devotees, and chant as purely as possible while understanding the real verdict of the scriptures. Okay, that's one. Then. Any question there?
I've read in the time that the Devas are considered Sakham Bhaktas because they have, they're elevated but have material desires. And your chart showed Sakham Bhakti.
Way at the bottom, yeah.
Still Rajaguru as Rajasic.
Yeah. So these people are not devotees who are down there. They're just doing karma. So when we get up to Svargaloka, they're very highly qualified because they're already sattvic, and they're also doing bhakti because they're devotees. They're all devotees in the upper planets, but they may not be the purest devotees also, but they're nevertheless qualified at least to rule over the lower things. So sometimes it is said that they got a little bit of mixture of karma in their bhakti itself. In other words, they still have some desire to enjoy on heavenly planets like that when they're doing their bhakti. So therefore, that gives a little mixture, mixed bhakti. But that's quite different from just doing Sakama Karma Yoga, which is no bhakti, or very little bhakti actually.
I read that sometimes the suras harass the Devas, and that's a reaction to the Devas' mature desires. The reaction comes in the form of being harassed by the demons. The devas.
By the demons?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's the reaction to their,
Well, we could just say that all of this takes place even on Brahmaloka, as we see in Bhagavatamrita. Even Brahma has to run and hide. So what this means is that no place is perfect in the material world. It's relatively better, but it's never perfect. So there's always some insecurity on any planetary system, and you can get disturbed or kicked out or whatever, or have to run away or get defeated. Even heavenly planets is relatively rare, but it may happen. Cause, of course, we can figure out some cause, but it just shows the imperfect nature of the material world. So in general, the upper planets are sattvic and the lower places are more tamasic or rajasic, but that's just the average. Sometimes we'll get rajagun or tamagun in the devatas or upper persons, because no guna is pure. Okay? So it can manifest at any time in them, and much less than down here. Just like in Satya Yuga, it's much better than in Kali Yuga, but still in Satya Yuga also there's people that are have problems or faults, and then even people in Sattva-gun develop faults. Or even a Brahman is supposed to be in Sattva-gun, but he can have faults also, so he can get Tamagun or Rajagun also. So it's only by prominence that we label things Sattva-gun or Rajagun and Tamagun, but they can manifest all these other gunas as well sometimes, but much less than the lower gunas. Okay, so, yeah.
So, obviously we all have friends and family who are very attached to material things. So what are some recommendations for people who are close to us and try to raise them to closer to bhakti through karmakanda?
If they're only in karmakanda?
If they're attached to material things.
But they have faith or no faith? Because we don't preach to the faithless, so...
Well, my experience personally, like my family,
Oh, I see. They're not doing karmakanda though. They're just attached to the material world. Yeah. Okay, so how do you preach to them, you're saying? To people who are materially attached?
You might bring these people closer to bhakti. Like they have faith in God, maybe
okay.
have an idea of that, but
yeah.
they just don't see it.
Yeah. So it depends on how much faith in pure bhakti they have. Maybe they have some faith in God, so maybe that's okay, but they may have a prejudice against Krishna instead of, Christ or whatever like that. So maybe difficult. So to preach directly. So therefore, the ninth offense is don't preach to the faithless person. So nevertheless, we should preach to them. So the way we can preach to them is not by words, just by association, or accidentally, without their knowing it, engaging them in bhakti by giving them prasadam, just letting them see a picture once in a while, letting them hear kirtan and stuff like that. So by that, then they get a little bit, the soul gets a little bit affected, and then gradually they can develop faith that way. Okay, so now we go on to some other offenses not related to identifying the name with karmas or anything, but this one is committing sin on the strength of the name. So we have different stages of sin. It's a very general term. Usually we think of sin as just doing a sinful activity, but it has subtle origins. So the origin ultimately is avidya or ignorance, which manifests as ahankara. We develop identity with the material body, and then the atma reflecting into the identifying with the material body develops desires to exercise the sense of his body, different senses to get enjoyment. So that's called the pap bija, or the seed of sin. We get desires. That leads to the actions. And if they're not according to Scripture, it results in sin. And that gives a reaction in terms of suffering. So these are the stages of sin until it becomes a suffering. Of course, you could do punyas as well instead of papas, and then you get an enjoyment in the material world. In either case, it's a bondage. But most people don't worry about the punyas. They're worried about the suffering they'll get from doing the sinful activity. So that the suffering is the end result, and people may be worried about doing the action to get the suffering. If they didn't get the suffering, they wouldn't worry about it, and they would do it. So the only fear is the suffering. So in Scripture, the name is glorified because it eradicates the suffering. That's your prarabdha karmas. Whatever karmas you have in this lifetime get eradicated by chanting the holy name. It will also eradicate the desire in the acts themselves, the desire for sin and the acts, and it will also get rid of the avidya. All these sources of suffering are eradicated by the name. So that was the first quality of bhakti, kleshagni, destruction of suffering, which took place on that was the suffering. All the levels of suffering get destroyed by name and bhakti. And this is the easiest process to get rid of all of this. The other process is jnana and yoga, but that's a very difficult process to get rid of the ahankara, etc. When they succeed in doing it, they get rid of all the karma, then they get liberation. But it's a very long process. But to get rid of that karma even is not so difficult in bhakti yoga, because we see even Ajamil just got rid of his karmas, past, present, future, by chanting once, accidentally, not even with devotion. Chanted the name of Narayan, not even Krishna's name. And he got free of all of his karmas. So process of chanting the holy name is very, very powerful then. So, as we do bhakti, we develop gradually, just like a plant grows. We get a seed and then we water it, and it develops a little sprout, and then it has 2 little leaves, and then it grows and grows and grows. So bhakti also develops more and more, from a little to a greater amount. And in the meantime, there may be some traces of sin, traces of karma, traces of desire, and ahankara. So something remains. However, if we do bhakti steadily, then we go through what is called anartha nivritti, and all of these things gradually dissipate. So this is the process of kleshagni, gradual dissipation of the karmas. And that will continue into bhava stage. When there's nothing left, no anarthas at all, then there's only bhakti, then it becomes prema. So when we're going through this process, then there's a gradual eradication of the sin. Right. So in that process of doing the bhakti, then because we do have anarthas, we do have desires to some degree, that may manifest as a sinful activity. But, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, he's still my devotee, and therefore he's absolved. He only has to do his bhakti. Let him continue to do the process of bhakti. And Krishna says he's still my devotee. Right? So we see that therefore the bhakti is very powerful. It eradicates sin, and even if the devotee commits sin, still the Lord is very forgiving. So some devotees may then hear all of this and say, very good, therefore I'll be a devotee, chant Hare Krishna, and commit some sins. And then I don't get any reaction. Krishna says, okay, you're free from your sins. So I can get the best of both worlds, so to speak. I can get all my enjoyment, and I can do the process of bhakti and not get any bad reactions. So that type of mentality is not proper. It's aparad. Even to think like that is considered to be an aparad. And therefore we get unlimited suffering for that. So actually at Sudanam level, then we won't commit such an offense. We'll be beware of this and be very careful not to think in this devious way. So what is the remedy? Then we have to associate with pure Vaishnavas, that is, devotees who are practicing the process of pure bhakti. Right? And this will protect us from the offense. So when it's at Namabas stage, we have to chant constantly by the grace of Guru and devotees, and we get Sambandh again, and we remove the anarthas, and we come to Sudanam, and then we don't commit the offense. So the process of solving this problem is not very difficult. Get proper association, get proper knowledge, and chant constantly. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita there, in the analogy of bhakti to a growing a seed, then you grow the seed, and along the way, if you're not careful, then we get the mad elephant coming, the first offense, or we get the offense of inattention, and then the weeds grow up, and then we have to start picking out the weeds. Otherwise, if the weeds grow too big, then the creeper starts to wither and die, so bhakti gets covered over. So we have to be very careful that we don't develop new desires in the process of bhakti. So we have to be attentive, and we have to keep watering. Otherwise, if we don't carry out the processes regularly, the plant won't grow. And then another thing is, besides regular watering, is you put a fence around the plant to prevent the wild elephant from coming in. So what is the offense? It is association of devotees. So that prevents all of these materialists from getting in and influencing, and so you commit more aparans. Okay, so Asradadana Vimukha. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask a question about this. It seems that Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the acharyas keep reinforcing this idea of to get to Shuddhanam, you have to be constantly chanting. Whereas I've heard many times Prabhupada would, like some his disciples would go and sit and just chant, not do certain, I'm going to do 64 rounds and all like this. And I know you just do the 16 rounds and follow the principles. And then other people say, oh no, we just follow 16 rounds and the 4 principles, and we'll go back to Godhead. But if you're not chanting Shuddhanam, how can you go back to Godhead? So how do we take in these two instructions?
So constantly chanting, of course, we can say is a little bit of a relative term. Like it was chant once the holy name when you're a Vaishnava. That was one definition that Lord Chaitanya gave. So just Hare Krishna, okay, you're a Vaishnava, but now it's a little strange. So the next definition is chant constantly. Okay, we're chanting. We chant a lot. Maybe not constantly, because most of them are grihastas, and they spent 8 months in Navadvip doing their profession, and they're doctors or brahmanas teaching or whatever like that. So obviously they couldn't chant 24 hours a day or even 18 hours a day, but constantly for them was, at least they seriously dedicate some time of the day to chanting, as opposed to just chanting once in their whole life or once every day. So it's a little bit relative. And then there's, of course, the other extreme of constant chanting, like Haridas Thakur, who was chanting all day and all night. So that constant can mean various things according to your ashrama and whatever.
So it is possible to reach Shuddhanam just chanting 16 rounds a day if they're really attentive and really done with love?
Yeah, and the knowledge. You need the knowledge, And you have to at least minimize your anarthas and not indulge in, excessively in your anarthas.
Prabhupada's mercy, I guess, that's successful.
Yeah.
Maharaj, can you explain the difference between weakness of heart and sinful activities? Because sometimes someone may say that you're being too fanatic, why don't you, that sometimes in a community of devotees there's different gradations of devotees, and some may say it's okay if you watch a movie once in a while or go eat at a restaurant. So what's the difference? Because sometimes you may think it's not that bad, and then minimize it, and then it can lead to something else. So the difference between weakness of heart and sinful reactions, and then also practice in a proper way and be strong.
Yeah, well, there's various levels. Like, everyone is fortunate if they can just chant once favorably or once purely, that's okay. That's one level. If you can chant more, fixed number of rounds, that's better. So in ISKCON, we kind of set some standard, 16 rounds as a standard and whatever. Other places, they may have lower standards, so qualifications a little lower then. We set a little higher standard for recognition as a fixed Vaishnava, and then we follow for regulated principles, etc. So we have some sort of a standard. It's not the only standard, but that's the standard that Prabhupada set. So we take that as one sort of standard. And at the same time, we shouldn't reject everybody else if they can't follow, but they're just not up to that standard, so they can take part in our festivals and programs, etc. But we're not going to accept them in the ashram if they're not going to follow those, to try to come up to that standard. So it's just it's one level, and then some people may have higher standards, but that's individual. And maybe the Babajis have another level standard or whatever, which may be much higher, and they chant 64 rounds or whatever. So it's a matter of one's qualification, and we're at one level, but we can't insist that everybody has to come to that level because they may not be capable in this lifetime of doing that. But we can just certainly encourage them, and hopefully if they follow at their level nicely, steadily, they can gradually improve. They may not, but if they do, fine, then they can come up to a higher level later on. Okay, so here we have another aparad giving the name to the faithless people, vimukha, those who are materialists. So the materialists or the asuras, etc., they're not really capable of hearing the name properly. They will always commit offense. They'll think of it as material, the name is material, the Lord is material, whatever. And they may even have some hostility towards the Supreme Lord or God or whatever. So if they're exposed to the name, then after some time, gradually, then they can develop faith. And if they get faith, then they can seriously accept the name, hear the scriptures, and come to Sudanam. If they don't have that faith, then there's no possibility of having them come to a higher level. So the first process, therefore, is simply to hear the name if they're incapable of following or accepting instructions properly. So, if the faithless person, for his own motivated reasons, comes to the Vaishnava, especially a guru, and says, please give me the name, which means like first initiation almost, giving you nice instructions, and then that person, guru, gives it to him, even though he knows that he is not really qualified and he has no faith at all, and he's attached to material things, then that is considered to be an offense. So, giving the name to the faithless people, that's what it means, that we seriously accept them. At the same time, we understand that they're not really qualified because they have no faith. So that becomes an offense on the part of the guru or the Vaishnava, if he would do that. Of course, why would he do that? Generally, he shouldn't. If he knows he's not qualified, he shouldn't do that. But then one reason would be that he is interested in getting followers. He's interested in getting money. So we get a disciple, then he's got lots of money, and we take the money. So if the guru has material motives, he may do this, but then that's offensive on his part. He's exploiting his position as a guru. He's exploiting the holy name to get some money, material things. So that's bad on the part of the guru, and he commits offense by doing that. The Vaishnava, if he does that, he commits offense. So the sincere Vaishnava should instruct a person, if he sees he doesn't have faith and he's very attracted to material energy too, that he has to develop the faith and give up those material attachments to some degree at least. And when he recognizes the person really does have faith, then he can give him instructions. So he shouldn't immediately act on that and give him the instructions on the name. So, if the Vaishnava, knowing that he has bad motives, material motives, and he's unqualified, he gives the name and instructions to him, then he has to suffer for that. Sometimes we don't know. He may act so nicely, he may act like he has faith, but he's actually trying to join the movement for material purposes. And we only find that out later on. So of course, in that case, it's not such a fault on part of the Vaishnava because the person disguised himself. So, nevertheless, the guru should reject that person. So, if the a guru doesn't cut off the relationship with that erring disciple or unqualified person who's doing all sorts of things in the name of bhakti, then the guru gets some of the effect. He gets dragged to hell along with that erring disciple, so he has to reject him. And of course the disciple himself goes to hell because of his impersonating a Vaishnava and committing all sorts of abominable acts under the name of a Vaishnava. So if a Vaishnava does such a thing, either accidentally or knowingly, then he has to remedy that by recognizing that offense, give up the disciple, and reveal his offense if he did it intentionally before the Vaishnavas. So, what is the proper way? How do we preach to these persons? If we can't preach to them, what do we do? So, Sankirtan is so powerful that it affects everyone, even if they are demons, even if they're materialists, even if they have no faith. The name can affect them if they hear it. So that's the way we preach to the faithless. Let them hear the holy name. And gradually, by hearing that, if they hear it more and more and more, then they can change their heart and develop faith. Once they develop faith, then we can give them good instructions. So that's the proper method of preaching to the faithless persons, rather than giving them serious instructions and treating them like devotees when they're not qualified. So, if that's the procedure followed, then the asura and the demons and the materialists, if they hear the name constantly, gradually they develop faith. When they develop faith, then we give them good instructions. Then they can come to the level of pure bhakti. Then they can do sadhana, and then finally they get prema. So that is the correct procedure. So this is the method that Lord Chaitanya devised for saving the whole world, aparadhis and innocent people and devotees. So it's gradual for the sinners and others and materialists, and once they get to the bhakti, then they can proceed more quickly. Okay, another one, pramada. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur takes this as a separate offense, one of the 10, and he clubs the other one, thinking the name is imaginary and exaggeration, etc. in one, and Harinam Kalpanam, interpreting the holy name, takes that as one, and then he puts pramada, which is also mentioned in the Sanskrit as another one. So pramada here means inattention. We saw one of the four faults of sense perception. One of them was pramada, inattention. So here's inattention in chanting. So if we're inattentive, we can't get steadiness or nishtha. So we'll stay at the level of anartas, having anartas, which is called anishtata bhakti. And if you can't come to nishtha, you can't go further. You can't get up to prema. So even if we have sambandha gyan and we chant constantly, it looks like we're chanting purely or whatever, if we're inattentive, then this will block our progress. So this is another factor, along with getting sambandha gyan And doing steady bhakti, we also have to be attentive. So what is inattention? One is indifference. We don't have any attraction to chanting the holy name. With little faith, so somebody says you have to chant. So, okay, we chant because somebody says, but we really don't like it. So the reason we don't really like it is because we have material tastes. We'd rather do material things. We'd rather talk about material things, rather think of material things. So we have different type of attachment. That's anuraga. So lack of attachment for the name and attachment for material things. So this makes us indifferent to the chanting of the holy name. So this is a kind of mental attitude we have. So we'll do it, but we'll do it simply because we have to do it, not because we want to do it. So what is a remedy? Chant for short periods in association of people who do like to chant. Avoid distractions in our surroundings so that our mind doesn't go all over the place. And gradually, by chanting in that way for short periods, the material desires will decrease, and taste will begin to appear. As well as that, we have some favorable items like living in the holy dham, Tulsi Devi, chanting their Tulsi Devi, chanting in the association of Vaishnavas. So these help us develop some taste or attraction for the name. Another type of pramada or inattention is inertia. Very, very lazy, no eagerness at all. So therefore, when we try to chant, we interrupt the chanting constantly, or we even delay the chanting until it's bedtime or something. We just have no desire to do anything. So it's like not enthusiastic at all. So also not good. So again, associate with Vaishnavas. One quality in bhava is not wasting time. So the Vaishnava likes to use his time in engaging in devotional activities like chanting. So if we see Vaishnavas who absorb themselves in devotional activities, not in Maya, then that's good association. And we'll also become like them and begin to engage ourselves properly and enthusiastically. Another type of inertia or inattentiveness is restless. The mind is constantly thinking other things. We cannot concentrate on the holy name. Mind is distracted. Now this again is caused by material attachment. We think of other things because we have other attachments other than the Supreme Lord. We may be interested in possessions and money and women, success, position, or whatnot. And this will keep distracting our mind. So how do we do that? We can do vratas, like fasting on Ekadasi, or on appearance days of the Lord. Associate with the devotee, stay in the dham, carry out Shravana very carefully, hear the scriptures nicely, and chant try to chant with attention as much as possible, proper attitude. In Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says it's very difficult for me to control the mind. It's like trying to control the wind. So then Krishna answers what? Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagya grihate. Practice. One has to continue to practice controlling the mind. So that's what we have to do in chanting. If the mind is distracted, we have to keep pulling the mind back. And then gradually we develop a higher taste. Any question there?
In regards to inattention, sometimes we're chanting around the temple and the devotee will interrupt you right while you're chanting. Just like and like I also heard like when you see another Vaishnava, you're meant to offer respect all the time, but also you're trying to focus on chanting. So this kind of seem like two contradicting things because like you're trying to really focus, but then someone might come past and you ignore them because you're focusing on the chanting. Is that considered an offense to the Vaishnava or to the name? Like what's more important?
Respect the Vaishnava or respect the name. But
sometimes it feels like you're in between two.
Well, it would depend, I suppose, on the situation. If it's a senior Vaishnava that you respect or something, then you should at least respect. But then we don't have to prolong that. We can just continue chanting, but give some respect in others. So that can actually encourage our chanting in one sense. And it's a Vaishnava association, so by honoring the Vaishnavas, we can get inspired to chant better. But if you use the opportunity just to talk or something, then that's different.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. The topic you touched earlier about giving the name to the faithless. Nowadays, in ISKCON, to get Diksha initiation, you need to go through the disciple course. So there is a kind of a sort of assessment where the person is and what is his intention. But I mean, in the early days and until a few years ago, it seems to me that there was the gurus, they were applying kind of flexibility or more karuna, more compassion in giving the holy names. Even Prabhupada in the very beginning it was initiating as many people as possible to the holy name. So how do we understand the balance? Because it is said, it was pretty dramatic when it was saying the guru that gives the holy name to a faithful person, he goes to hell.
Well, people may have faith, and then they may leave the movement or whatever. So that doesn't mean they necessarily gave up their faith, but for different reasons they could have left. Their material desires are stronger, or whatever that's so. And sometimes we cannot even tell how strong the faith is. But nevertheless, we see over experience and time. If we want steady devotees, then we're a little more cautious, that's all. So in the beginning of the movement, within about 10 years, Prabhupada established this movement. So it was a very short period of time, and therefore he took extraordinary measures. So the process of initiation was quite quick in those days like that. But later on we realized also that it's better to be a little cautious, and since we have more time, Prabhupada had less time, so therefore he introduced things and did things quite quickly. But nowadays, a little more cautious, and we realize that the devotees should be a little more educated also, so that they understand what is bhakti, who is Krishna, and therefore we require them to read books, etc., and also to know what the function of Guru is, and then what is the position of Prabhupada in relation to that. So all of these things have to be there, so therefore we have this disciple course, and we have requirements in terms of knowledge like tests and reading, etc., to make sure that they are serious devotees ahead of time. So these are just say precautionary measures to make sure the devotees that do get initiated are steadier.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last offense is oh, somebody got one. Okay, yeah.
Isn't it considered an offence if we chant out of anger and frustration due to some material problem?
If we chant for that, well, you can do that temporarily. There's one explanation given when we talk about anya abhilashita shunya. So that means no other desires except to please Krishna. So we shouldn't have any other desires. But then the word used is abhilashita sunya, not abhilash shunya. So then it's explained that abhilashita means in general you shouldn't have other desires when you chant. So then our acharyas explain, what does that mean? It means that sometimes you may apply to Krishna in certain circumstances. Save me, Krishna, please save me from this circumstance. So in that circumstance, it's not contrary to our pure bhakti. If it becomes a constant daily practice, save me, save me, save me every day, then of course it would be mixed bhakti. But if it is an occasional thing under certain circumstances, then it's not a problem, and it doesn't interfere with our bhakti.
In one of the slides it said that sometimes the spiritual master may have the desire for followers or for money, but sometimes nowadays in ISKCON we see it's based more on compassion rather than wanting followers, or you see even amongst devotees they're reluctant to try to break someone because they just want to keep encouraging.
Yeah.
So would that be like on a case-by-case basis where an allowance is made, maybe someone's not chanting the full 16 rounds or maybe living with someone, but say that I'm following the 40 religious principles, but maybe they're not married. So is that, because then it also kind of maybe might disturb the rest of the community and maybe encourage others that, oh, I can also do that, and it sets a precedent.
In other words, you're saying that if they accept disciples, but they're not maybe fully qualified, but they do that to encourage them and to encourage others, but that's okay. The main idea here is that we're doing it for materialistic reasons, like, you know, money and wealth, which happens in some sampradayas. They'll just accept people because they're wealthy or whatever, and that way they get some money out of it. So hopefully that's not there in our system here in ISKCON. Okay, so the last offense is that low person who, even though hearing the glories of the holy name, does not have any attraction for the name because he's obsessed with the conception of self and ownership, is an offender to the name. So I've already mentioned that qualification for bhakti was we have faith and not too much material attachment. So now if the attachment is too much, then even if we get a little knowledge, it was very difficult to us to practice bhakti. We'll keep getting attracted to the material things. So therefore this can become an aparad to the name if we're trying to be a devotee and simultaneously we're hopelessly attracted to the material world. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur analyzes this as this attachment to material things which is very strong. It's the opposite of surrender. So in order to avoid this offense, we have to cultivate surrender. And surrender has 6 qualities in it. That is accepting what is favorable, rejecting what is unfavorable, take Krishna as our only protector, that is, we don't depend on devatas or anybody else, dependence on Krishna alone as our maintainer, humility or dainya, and we saw the gopis who had the most dainya of all, and subject to Krishna's will, we offer ourselves completely to Krishna, body, mind and soul. So these are the attitudes which are inherent in surrender. And Jiva Goswami says in Bhakti Sandarbha, this is the first anga of bhakti, this surrender. So this is inherent in the process of bhakti itself as one of the ingredients, because obviously we have to accept ourselves as a servant of the Lord and be very humble, and we're willing to do anything for Krishna. So we accept the favorable, reject the unfavorable, etc. So that surrender is inherent in all the different activities we do in bhakti. So we saw the last one was Atmanavedana, and that is Bhaktivinoda says the central one, and all the other ones are secondary to that Atmanavedana. So that attitude of giving everything to the Lord should be that there in our bhakti. As we see, it's Anya, Avilasha, Shunya, etc., and cultivating Krishna with no other desire. So we're offering everything to the Lord. So, if we don't have that, then we got the opposite. We're constantly thinking of oneself or myself, and we're constantly thinking of things for me and mine. So we get a lot of false ego. So such a person cannot do bhakti properly. He cannot follow the rules of bhakti. He'll do things because of his desires. And be very independent in what he's doing. So for such a person, very, very difficult to follow the process of bhakti. So that's something like the person in the river. He's cultivating bhakti, but he can't go anywhere. So it's like the boatman with his anchor and the thing, pulling up the river, but he stays in the same place. After a while he gets frustrated because he's going nowhere and he's putting all this effort into it. So if we got too much material attachment, then we can't really move anywhere. So this offense is caused by great material attachments. Yeah. How do we get rid of that? We got to associate with people who are free from these attachments and completely surrendered to the Lord. In other words, that surrender was considered to be the opposite quality. So if we see devotees who are surrendered and we associate with them, then we can also develop a similar quality. Yeah? So if we practice this sharanagati or prapanna, then we can get free of this offense and we can get to prema. Oh. So we have all these different offenses, the 10 offenses. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is not only avoiding these, but we do the opposite. So instead of doing sadhu ninda and criticizing the devotees and thinking badly of the devotees, we serve the devotees and praise the devotees and whatever like that. Instead of thinking of the devatas and the Lord as equal, we offer our worship to the Supreme Lord with full dedication, Vishnu or Krishna. Instead of disobeying the Guru or offending the Guru, we serve the Guru with devotion. Instead of thinking the Bhakti Shastras are nonsense or whatever and criticize them, we respect them nicely, hear them properly, and recite them daily. And the thinking the name is exaggeration or whatever, instead of that, we glorify the name and understand its true qualities. And instead of thinking of it, as a pious activity like karma kanda, we understand that chanting the holy name is the highest, and we can do the acts of dharma, or not committing sinful activity, etc. Along with that, but we practice chanting as the main process to get prema. And instead of preaching to the faithless, we preach to the faithful. You can go to prema rather than material results, so we chant attentively instead of inattentively, and instead of having me and mine, we practice surrender to the Lord. So in this way, we can avoid the offenses by doing the positive things. Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
Seems like all the way through, all the remedies are actually just one remedy, the sadhu-sangha.
Yeah.
It's associated with devotees. So, like after hearing all this, should we worry about all these separate offences or just associate with devotees and chant?
Well, if we're not committing, there's not such a problem. Or at least we know what the offenses are, so we can avoid them because we have a little intelligence, But we see that generally devotees won't be committing many of these, like thinking it's a pious activity to go to Svargaloka, or thinking the name is exaggerated. We don't really do these ones so much anyway, or not too much material attachment. But we should be just aware of them, and we may find these in other people who are not devotees or whatever. So we can help them get out of those offenses. And as far as self, of course, to avoid the other ones like sadhu ninda, etc., better to associate with devotees. Yeah.
One other thing is, I remember that Prabhupada gave this Panchatattva mantra to chant before Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
And I heard once that he said that if you chant that, then it doesn't matter if you commit offences when you chant Hare Krishna, because Lord Chaitanya is so merciful. He doesn't accept the
yeah, that's true.
He only accepts the little body.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
how important is it to chant this Panchadhava? Because like, if we're in the offensive state,
Yeah. So we know that Lord Chaitanya is merciful even to the aparadis like Jagai and Madai, and he saves even them, and they can also get prema. So that's the Lord Chaitanya's mercy, and of course we're following in his footsteps also. And therefore we can also get rid of our offenses by praying to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and getting his mercy. At the same time, we shouldn't think, well, I'm praying to him now so that I can go out and commit all sorts of aparads. That's like committing sinful activities in the strength of the holy name, or committing sinful activities in the strength of Mahaprabhu, or committing aparads in the strength of Mahaprabhu, so we shouldn't do that either. But definitely we always have to approach Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because it's only through him we can get to Radha and Krishna. So similarly in chanting Hare Krishna again, we can go through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's what we chant Panchatattva mantra all the time.
Krishna, I just seems the aspect of faith is very prominent also in all these, the whole last few days of speech of Shraddha.
Mm.
It's very important. And I'm just thinking back to my experience of meeting devotees and everything like that, and trying to see what it was that developed that faith in me. Like, I didn't read so much Prabhupada's books or chant or anything, but what it was I was trying to become a better person myself. That was my goal at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see in the devotees that they had good qualities,
mm-hmm.
and they were sincere, and they were happy. And I was impressed by that. So that wanted me to sort of hang around them a bit more. I'm just thinking as far as how we present Krishna consciousness, or how we interact with new people. I think it's important that we kind of reflect on this aspect of faith, because it doesn't seem to be something that a lot of people out there have. But it doesn't take much to give someone that, like, to get that little spark is there, but to get that little ignition and to shut them across. So that was the other thing, is like the association, seeing the qualities.
Yeah. So association actually is actually the main item that will attract people. Huh? But why are they attracted to that association? So that again is probably previous birth times. They developed a little so that in this lifetime, when the Atma, they appreciate it when they get that association. Like you said, you appreciated the qualities of the devotees and their conduct and their attitude, etc., happiness, etc. So some people don't. That means they haven't developed that faith. So you had faith already, developed that faith in the devotees. So that is, we can say, the first sign actually. So that is when we get faith, then we associate with devotees. Okay? So you may have not understood the philosophy yet, but at least you had faith in the devotees. So that shows how personal contact is very important in the development of faith and in the process of bhakti. So we always emphasize sadhu sangha in all stages because of that. Which also means that therefore the devotees do have to act properly and and not be fake devotees and whatever. But if they are, sincerely practicing, automatically the qualities, attractive qualities, will manifest.
St. Francis of Assisi has a famous saying. He says, you should preach all day, and sometimes you should say something. Really like that.
Okay.
previous class, and ask a question from previous classes. Just when you were talking about bhakti comes from bhakti, so when your karma comes, then it doesn't seem like there's a devotee who's giving bhakti coming directly from Krishna, or is it that from previous kalpa?
Yeah, he's only appointed to be a Brahma because he is a devotee already. And immediately when he hears, he goes down on the stem of the lotus and he can't find where the root of the lotus is, and he comes back up, and then it's all dark up, and then he sits down and he meditates, and he hears the word tapa. So what does he do? He meditates on Supreme Lord. So already it looks like he's got some sort of knowledge of bhakti already in doing that. So previous lifetimes, obviously. Yeah.
And I have another question. I heard, I don't know where exactly in which scripture, but some devotees were saying that the Paramatma is in our heart, accompanies us in our material, in the journey in the material world, but when we go back to the spiritual world, then the Paramatma is not there because Krishna is present outside.
Yeah. Well, Paramatma is an expansion of the Lord for material world. So he's functional. In other words, he has three forms. This Mahavishnu, in charge of all of Prakriti. And then he's Garbhodaksha Vishnu within one universe. And then Kshirodaksha Vishnu within the Atma. So he's pervading all levels of the universe. And then he monitors creation, destruction, maintenance, and he witnesses all the activities of the jiva. And if he has desires, he helps him fulfill the desires by getting his senses and everything activated like this. So he helps the jiva in the material world fulfill his desires, but he also has the law of karma there, so that the desires are also in some sort of limitation because of the karma. So that's Paramatma function. For taking care of the jivas in the material world and creating the material world. Spiritual world, they don't need a creation or whatever like that. He doesn't have to monitor them for their material desires and try to fulfill that. So we have another function that is Bhagavan, and that's based on personal interaction with the Lord, not just a neutral witness of everything. So therefore the function is taken over by Supreme Lord. And the devotees are always thinking of the Lord in the spiritual world, so Bhagavan is in the heart there of all the devotees. And the devotees are in the heart of the Lord. Yeah? So that's one meaning given to Bhagavan. Bhagavan is Ba, Ga, and Va. So Va means Vasati. So the Lord lives in the devotee, and the devotee lives in the Lord. And that means the devotee is always thinking of the Lord is always thinking of the devotee. So that's how the Lord functions in the spiritual world. So it's not a material function anymore, so it's not Paramatma, it's Bhagavan. Yeah. Okay, Hare Krishna.